Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder, and this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We got a great show for you guys today. We're going to talk about the Big 12 championship game, the lingering hamstring injury of Kevin Durant, as well as the return of Caris Levert. But I think the one at the end of the show will be most interesting as I break down my top 5 Coach of the Year candidates so far this season. I think you guys will definitely enjoy that. I think it will definitely be worth your time to listen to all of that. Now, I want to start off the show by the biggest news out of yesterday in basketball was the Big 12 championship game, because today's the Big 10 championship game. And for people who haven't been following college basketball that heavily, the two best conferences in college basketball are the Big 10 and the Big 12, without question. Both teams are going to have 7 or more teams entering the NCAA tournament when Selection Sunday happens tonight, which will be awesome. You know, the NCAA tournament's going to have a really good field, and they're going to be played up in a bubble up in Indiana. So all these teams who won their conference tournaments are now going up to Indiana to quarantine before the tournament actually begins. Again, this will be really interesting to see how the NCAA can pull this off, but it's going to be really exciting. But getting to the game, Oklahoma State played Texas, and the way they got there was definitely a little different. Oklahoma State got there by beating West Virginia and then beating Baylor, who is everyone's favorite to win an NCAA championship out of the Big 12, because they've been a consensus top 3 team throughout most of the year. Now, it was all because of the fact of the style of play, aiding them a little bit more. Cade Cunningham using his size, Avery Anderson playing really well, Caleb Boone providing some post presence. Now, Oklahoma State's not a very big team. The tallest guy they play is about 6'8", 6'9", but they move the ball very well. They're very fast in transition. They're very disruptive defensively. And they're coached really well, so they all know where to be if Cade Cunningham is getting double-teamed. Now, they really have bought into their coach at an exceptionally high level, and I think that's primarily for the fact that they had a postseason ban originally, which looks like it's going to be overturned and they're going to be able to play in the NCAA tournament. But I think that the fact that 11 out of 13 guys stayed on this team and supported the coach has translated over to their success this year. And I think that really has paid major dividends for this team going forward. And if you look at their team, they got there basically by beating 2 top 10 teams. They went from being an 8th seed at the beginning of January to now being a consensus possible 2 or 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's incredible on their end, because what they're doing is they're getting themselves in position to win games, but also they have, I think, one of the hottest streaks in basketball going into yesterday's game. They've been winning a lot of big, close games. They have the most wins against AP top 10 teams in the country out of the Big 12. They've beaten West Virginia twice. They've beaten Texas. They just beat Baylor. They beat teams like Texas Tech, Oklahoma twice. They have a lot of great wins on their resume, and that's really helped them going forward. But let's talk a little bit about why I think they could be dangerous, and then I'll break down the Texas end, and then I'll break down the game itself. The reason why I think they'll be dangerous is because they have a lot of guys who know their role very well, and a lot of guys who can put the ball on the ground and get to the basket. They have guys who can shoot it, but also they have a guy who can take over the game in Cade Cunningham. He was a Big 12 Player of the Year, also the Big 12 Freshman of the Year. He's one of the only guys to do that. The only other guys who were in that same company with him were Kevin Durant, who turned out to be quite a great NBA player, and Michael Beasley, who had some runs in the NBA being very good, but he was exceptional in college at Kansas State. And he also led the Big 12 in scoring, so that just shows you kind of how the level that he can play at. He averages 21.9 points a game against ranked teams, too. And the thing is, again, he can take over a game anytime you need him, but they also know how to play without him. Now, on the other hand, there was Texas, right? And Texas has been a top 12 to 10 team most of the year, and they've been doing it by having a very good defensive game plan led by Shaka Smart. They have 5 guys on their court at any time that can switch 5, because Jericho Sims at 6'10", and Kai Jones at 6'11", and Greg Brown at 6'9", all move like small forward guards. They're all very athletic, very mobile, so that they can switch 5. And that's why they've been very effective defensively, because if Jericho Sims, their center, matches up on a point guard, it's not a mismatch because he can stay in front of those guys and force a difficult shot. They have 3 guys in their starting lineup who shoot 80% from the foul line, which is very important for them going forward because they have to continue to hit free throws down the stretch. Now they have those guys are Andrew Jones, who overcame leukemia. He's the player that overcame leukemia that really derailed a couple seasons for him, and he's back and playing at a very high level. Going into yesterday, he was the leading scorer for the team. They also got Courtney Rainey's a 13-point game scorer. He's 80% for the free throw line. And then Matt Coleman, a lefty who's been the heart and soul leader of this team, described as being Shaka Smart on the court. And they have some big wins this year. They've beaten Kansas, where they trounced them by 30 points. They beat Oklahoma State twice. They beat Texas Tech. They beat Oklahoma. Those are all huge wins for them. Now, they didn't beat Baylor, but they are a very good team. And they have 6 guys who average 8.5 points or more. So again, going into this game, you see a very different kind of game plan, right? Texas is very athletic. They live through their guards. Their bigs roam around to the basket, are active on the glass. And they live more on their defense than I think Oklahoma State does. Oklahoma State likes to play in a track meet type of game. But I think yesterday what people didn't know is this game was probably one of the best games I've seen in college basketball in a long time. It was an unbelievable game. And the Big 12 championship was decided. Texas won 91-86, which is a big win for their program and a big win for them because Shaka Smart has not won a Big 12 championship since he's been there. And he's had talented teams, so he was on the hot seat entering this year, and he was able to get it done for this team. Now look, Kansas allowing them to go to the Big 12 championship game because of COVID protocols, and their team did help out. But I think they would have beaten Kansas anyway, if they played the way they did yesterday. Now, I'm going to break down kind of how the game went, how the first half went, how the second half went, why Texas won this game, so people have a general understanding of why I think both teams can totally be Elite 8 to Final 4 teams in the NCAA tournament. Now, to start off the game, Cade Cunningham allowed the game to come to him. Cade Cunningham is a guy who in the last 6 games has been averaging only 6.5 points in the first half, but 17.5 in the second half. He's a second half player. So in the first half, he always lets the game come to him because the way Texas was defending him is they were trapping him on ball screens. They pressured him full court. Anytime he got in the lane, they were doubling or sending major help. And what the guys in Oklahoma State were struggling with a little bit was making threes off those passes and also just, again, trying to figure out ways to hit shots. What they did start figuring out, though, is they could cut to the rim on these guys because there was a lot of guys ball watching instead of actually understanding where their man was. And as a result of that, Cunningham was reading the defense and making the right play. But they were down by 10 at half because Texas was crushing them on the glass because they're bigger, and Jericho Sims played an unbelievable game yesterday. I'll get to him in a minute. But I think what they tried to do for Cunningham in the second half was allow him to get in positions where he could shoot the three more. He's been really good from three, from the top of the key and the right wing. He shoots from about 50% from the right wing from three, and near that from the top of the key. That's where he's actually one of the most efficient. And the coaches keep encouraging him to shoot more threes. And the first half, he shot threes, but again, they were pressuring him a lot. He couldn't get a shot off. But in the second half, he started using his size, shooting over the top of guys, not trying to go into the rim against 3 or 4 guys and try to shoot the ball. Now, Cade Cunningham will be the consensus number 1 pick in the draft. I think everyone who watched that game yesterday will believe that. But I think what Texas did very well was that they trapped him in the first half, got him a little bit out of rhythm, and that's all they kind of needed against Oklahoma State, because Oklahoma State scored a lot of points in the second half. There was not a lot of defense in the second half by either team. But I think what's also important, though, to recognize is that Kai Jones was a big factor in the first half for Texas. He had all 11 of his points in the first half. And by doing that, he put Texas in the prime position to be successful. What do I mean by that? Well, he got on the glass and got a lot of easy points. He got deflections and blocked shots, and he used his NBA potential because he's 6'11" with guard skills. So doing that allowed Texas to be very effective because they could get out and run. They could switch ball screens because he can guard guys like that too. And him and Jericho Sims being 6'10" and 6'11" respectively, they could also be able to dominate in the paint and shot block and cause Cade Cunningham, Avery Anderson, Caleb Boone, and the other role players in Oklahoma State to struggle. And if you also look at the fact that Cunningham was 2 of 8 in the first half, and that was a credit to Texas's defense. I also think the fact that Ramey played a good defensive game in the first half, I think that switching up defenders on Cunningham was a really smart move by Shaka Smart. And then again, it went back to Kai Jones was the answer in the first half. He was the guy that really made things go for Texas. Jericho Sims as well, but Kai Jones had all 11 of his points in the first half. And he also started this game for one of the first times because Greg Brown against Texas Tech had a meltdown that caused him to come off the bench. And he didn't play a ton of minutes yesterday. And if you look at the second half, the way it started was that Oklahoma State wanted to play at a faster pace. They were playing too much of walk the ball up the court against Texas in the first half, which is what Texas wants you to do. Even though Texas likes to play fast, Texas also is a very good defensive team. So they want to set up their defense, get their shot blockers in position to go, get their defensive help and schemes and everyone in the right positions to be successful. When you're running constant transition, it's hard to do that because you have to be really quick and good on your communication in order for that to happen. In the second half, that's what got Cunningham going. He got in transition, got a couple easy buckets. He was pushing the pace a little bit. And guys like Avery Anderson excel at that, right? Avery Anderson's been really coming on recently. And, he fouled out and only had 10 points yesterday. But having him get out in transition, that really, and Ice Likely as well, right? Those guys getting out in transition, that's the way that Oklahoma State's at their best. If you allow them to get out in transition, you're going to be in a big trouble because Cunningham is a very smart player. So he's either going to look to score or get his guys involved. And also the big thing, too, is that for Texas, what was big for them, though, I think, was the fact that Jericho Sims had 21 and 13, and he wasn't great from the free throw line. He was 5 of 10, right? But that's what Jericho Sims is. He's not the most skilled post player or shooter, but he's a guy that can take bigs off the dribble. He's a really good pick-and-roll guy. He's excellent at running the floor. Because he's an unbelievable athlete. I think he's going to be an NBA prospect. I think he'll be on the mock draft for sure because teams could use him as a defensive anchor, kind of similar to how Jared Allen plays for Cleveland. And Jared Allen's also another Texas guy. But Jericho Sims played, I think, his best game of the year. And he's been, maybe besides David McCormick from Kansas, the most improved player in the Big 12. And, giving you 9 and 7, and yesterday giving you 21 and 13, that's just exceptional. And when I meant 9 and 7, I meant his averages for the year. But that's what the thing with Texas is Texas has 5 guys who average 8.5 points or more. So you don't know who's stepping up on a certain night. And it was Jericho Sims yesterday that had to step up because Courtney Ramey didn't have a ton of points. Matt Coleman played unbelievable. He had 30. I'll get to him in a minute. But Andrew Jones, who's the leading scorer, didn't score a whole lot of points either. So they needed every point they could get from Jericho Sims, every rebound, all these blocked shots that he was contributing. Right? And there was one play I remember specifically that it was Avery Anderson was going to attack him on the fast break, got a steal, and he chased back, walled them off, and it made Avery Anderson lose the ball mid-shot and turn the ball over. That's the effort plays that Shaka Smart's been emphasizing to this team all year that they've really started to buy into, because Texas's big thing is always coming out with a sense of urgency in the past. Could they actually build Shaka Smart's mentality correctly? Or could Shaka Smart actually instill that in the team? Was he the right man for the job? Clearly, Shaka Smart can coach. So people saying he wasn't the right man for the job, they look really foolish now as he won a Big 12 championship. But I think also the fact that the role players on Texas, besides Jericho Sims, stepped up. And it wasn't just Kai Jones. It was Brock Cunningham. He gave you 7 points and 8 rebounds, couple of assists, couple steals, a block off the bench. And what he did is he was a glue guy. Right, he was the energy guy. He made the big plays, big rebounds, big loose balls when you needed him to. And that's what teams in March have to be able to demonstrate. It's an ability to have guys in their team that are going to take over games, right? But also guys who are going to make winning plays. And Brock Cunningham, the sophomore, who didn't play at all as a freshman, but has been playing more now, showed great defensive promise on Cade Cunningham, made stuff tougher. Now, Cade Cunningham did have 29 points. So people are not going to sit there and say, oh, you shut down Cade Cunningham. No, they didn't shut him down. But it's very hard to shut down Cade Cunningham. So, because of the way he can shoot it, get to the basket, post you up, his intelligence. But he made it tough on him. But I think the key rebounds he had made things also very important for this team too, because he's 6'5", right? He's not 6'10". But the thing is, that's what makes guys like Draymond Green so special, or guys like Alex Caruso in the NBA so special, because the impact of role players always gets undermined by the star-level talent. And yesterday was, yes, about the stars. Cunningham had 29, and Coleman had 30, and Jericho Sims as a starter has been providing minutes, but Jericho Sims does not normally get 21 and 13, and he showed a lot of promise, and that's what he needs to do. If Jericho Sims plays like 10 points, 10 rebounds most nights in the NCAA tournament, this team can go far because he's great defensively and great on the glass. If he can give you 10 to 12 points, because I'm not sure he's going to give you 21 every night, but if he can give you 10 to 12 points, this team could totally make the Final Four, Elite Eight. They're a very good basketball team. Oklahoma State is too, because Oklahoma State has small ball with athletes who like to run and a really, really dang good player in Cade Cunningham. Especially with all those great teams in the Big Ten, you need guys to take over the game when you play against some of these high-level teams like Gonzaga, like Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, Texas, Kansas. You go down the line. And Oklahoma State has proven that to me, that they are a legit team too. This game was unbelievable. But the thing for Oklahoma State is they can't wait for the second half to start pushing the pace. They got to start doing that at the beginning. And that's why I think when Texas got that first half lead, that really saved them, because they had a 10-point lead and only won the game by 5 points. Now, it's because they made key plays. It's because Coleman, Jones, and Ramey made their free throws. And also because Jericho Sims provided such a valuable presence on the defensive and offensive end, they were able to escape with this win and win a Big 12 championship. Now, I know it's unprecedented, and I know it wasn't necessarily the normal Big 12 championship because they didn't beat Kansas to get to the Big 12 championship. But I think of the way they played yesterday would have beaten Kansas, because Kansas has been so inconsistent most of the year. They beat Baylor, but then get blown out by Texas and lose to Texas Tech and teams like that, and lose to Oklahoma. I mean, look, you don't really know what you're getting in Kansas. To be honest, you don't really know what you're getting with Texas either, but Texas is definitely more trustworthy in my opinion. Now, before I go to the commercial break, where I see these teams going ideally is I see both teams definitely being Elite Eight teams. And I think it's because of the fact that they have guys who can defend. I think Texas's length and athleticism can be really difficult for teams to handle because I think they have 5 guys who can all contribute to the game. Actually, not just 5, not just offensively, but they have 7 guys who contribute on both ends of the court. Possibly 8, too. But Oklahoma State's so good when they run in transition, and Cade Cunningham is so dominant, but they have a supporting cast that works. It's different than Iowa, when Iowa's supporting cast, besides Wieskamp, doesn't always show up, because that puts a lot more pressure on Garza to deliver. Oklahoma State's supporting cast, I think, is better, and I think that's why they could totally be an Elite 8 team. Because they're playing at a high level, and they have guys who take over. Texas could be that too, because Texas defends. Coleman, Sims, Jones, Ramey, Kai Jones, even Greg Brown to an extent too, because he's had games where he's went off. They can all have good games, and the fact that they can defend and they bought into what the coach wants them to do is the reason that, number one, they won the Big 12 championship game, but a reason why they also could go to the Elite 8 as well. And when I look at them going forward, I think both these teams are not teams you want to see in the NCAA tournament. Because they've been battle-tested. It's because they're both very athletic and fast. It's because their styles are very different and very hard to prepare for. And it's because they both have guys. Now, look, Cade Cunningham was the best player on the court. But they do, Texas does have guys you can trust, right? They have 3 guards you can give the ball to, and they can go get you a bucket. And Jericho Sims is really good at what he can do, right? Which is, gets the ball, he can take it big off the dribble, right? He's really good on the glass. He can run the floor very well. He's very good in the pick and roll. Very good at shot blocking, right? And for Texas, that's the key for them going forward. And that's why I think both these teams are really dangerous teams going into the NCAA tournament, and why I think they both totally could be Elite 8 teams going forward. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I get back, we're going to talk about Kevin Durant's lingering hamstring injury and the concerns I see with that. Also, check out later in my show as I break down my top 5 Coach of the Year candidates in the NBA this year. Should be a great segment at the end of the show, too. But thank you, and after this commercial break, we'll be back with talking about Kevin Durant's lingering hamstring issue.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder, and this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. On my last segment, I broke down the fantastic Big 12 championship game within college basketball. Texas beat Oklahoma State 91-86 behind 30 points from Matt Coleman and 21 points and 13 rebounds from Jericho Sims, and they fend off a 29-point effort from the future number 1 draft pick, Cade Cunningham, who was magnificent yesterday as always. Also, check out later in the show as I break down my top 5 Coach of the Year candidates, which I think will be really interesting to go through. But on this segment, I'm going to talk about the Brooklyn Nets, specifically Kevin Durant's lingering hamstring injury. He's been out almost a month with this injury. He hasn't played since February 13th. So yeah, it's been a month since he hasn't played basketball for the Brooklyn Nets. The last game he played was against the Golden State Warriors, and he hasn't played since. At first, I thought it was a load management thing, in which I thought he was going to be back in a couple games, and they were just being cautious. But now they're looking to get some imaging on it, and this does look a little concerning. He hasn't played the games that have resumed. He had to sit out the All-Star game. Luckily, they've won both games that he hasn't played. They beat Boston 121-109 behind 40 points from Kyrie Irving. And then last night, beat the Detroit Pistons by 5 points. Harden had 22 points and Irving had 18 to lead the Brooklyn Nets to that victory yesterday. But I think also what I took away, though, is that this is a problem. And Steve Nash seems to be very optimistic about this. And look, as a coach, I think you have to be optimistic about it because it's on the other leg than where his Achilles injury was, which could mean it's an overcompensation, but that's not what the doctors believe. The doctors think that it's just unrelated at all to that. And Steve Nash said that there will be a ramp-up time, and what he means by that is that they're going to try and ramp it up for this end-of-the-season playoffs for him when he comes back, because they don't want to just throw him in the mix right away and have him play 40 minutes if he's not ready to go. Similar to how they're treating Blake Griffin, because Blake Griffin hasn't played basketball in 3 weeks, they're load managing him until he can come back to play at full strength, and then they're just going to slowly put his minutes up. Look, I've never been a fan of load management, but it's what the coaches decide, and that's their policy, and that's what they're going to stick to. So far, only Durant has done half-court drills and not any 5-on-5, which, again, is concerning, right? It's been almost a month, and he hasn't really done that. He's done light court work, right? And he's done half-court drills, no full court or 5-on-5, so he's just doing light kind of offensive stuff, probably getting a lot of shots up, right? So trying to keep himself ready to go. And the issue with that is the Big Three has only played 8 games together. But now they also have Blake Griffin in the mix, who they have to also implement into their chemistry. He hasn't played yet since he's been with the Brooklyn Nets, and they got to see how this whole team comes back together. In 680 days, Durant has only played 20 games. Think about that, right? That's since his Achilles tear. He's only played 20 games. That is a little concerning if you ask me. That is a little concerning because he is so talented, and to not have him be healthy is definitely very concerning for Brooklyn going forward. And look, you have Blake Griffin being brought in there, right? So you have to figure out how he, Durant, Kyrie, and Harden are going to work together. And where you're going to put Blake Griffin. You're going to put him in the starting lineup, or you're going to take him off the bench. How is he going to work at the small ball 5? All this kind of stuff is stuff that they need to figure out because chemistry is still very important in the NBA, in my opinion. Right? You can't just show up and start playing without building any sort of defensive scheme, chemistry, all that kind of stuff. And Brooklyn struggles defensively. I mean, last night they got out-rebounded by 12 on the glass, which is a big part of defense. And they're lucky Detroit is so bad offensively, but outside of Jeremy Grant, that they can't really score points. But they do struggle defensively. And Kevin Durant, when healthy, is a good defender. He was very good in his time in Golden State. He has been pretty good this year, but he's been, I think, taking it a little bit lighter, trying to integrate himself back in slowly. But I think the fact is, in order for a team to win a championship, you can't just rely on outscoring teams. Because you're going to have nights like that Harden and Kyrie had last night where they don't shoot the ball particularly well. And everyone's going to go crazy the fact that they held Detroit to 95 points. Detroit is the second worst team in basketball. Second worst team in basketball. They're going full rebuild mode. They are not a good basketball team. So that's nothing to be proud of. And then remember, they did lose this team by allowing them to score like 125 points just a couple months ago. And the reason why you need everyone there, right, is that's more for the defensive purposes. Because Kevin Durant can be integrated into an offense perfectly fine because he's not super ball dominant and he's a great shooter and all that kind of stuff. And he's very efficient, right? He can take 12 shots and get 30 points. But you got to integrate Blake Griffin in there. And Blake Griffin is a guy who has been ball dominant at times. Right? He's a guy that needs to figure out how he's going to fit his role because Blake Griffin's always been the first or second option of the team. Right now, he might be the fourth or fifth option. He might be the fifth option, honestly, because Joe Harris might even get the ball more than him. But then defensively, that's more the problem there, right? Because Blake Griffin's not been known to be a great defender. And you're going to have to figure out how they're going to implement that incorrectly. How they're going to be at least above average defensively, because I think that's what they need to be in order to win a championship. And then you look at Brooklyn overall, right? Everyone's going crazy because they have three guys and they can score a lot of points, right? But I think the big thing is, look, Kyrie and Harden have had excellent chemistry around the court together. They've both been able to put up great numbers when they're together because Harden has sacrificed, to his credit. I never really liked the iso ball style in Houston, but for him, that was very good for his scoring period of time, right? Because he's an unbelievable iso scorer. It's just, again, it didn't have a ton of ball movement in it, even though it was an efficient offense. It just never really won a championship quite for him. But now he's playing a championship-style type of basketball because he's moving the ball, he's taking very efficient shots, he's still getting 25 points a game, but he's also averaging 11 assists. So Brooklyn has a guy who can run the point at least for them. So offensively, they should be okay. But again, it comes down to the fact that Blake Griffin now says that he wants to impact winning also. And Blake Griffin has been a star for a lot of his career. So you have to have KD back because that's going to help them figure out how to move everyone. Again, when I'm talking about all this kind of stuff, and I seem to be repeating the chemistry point, but that's important. If you want to win and you want to build a good team, there are certain things you have to be able to accomplish. You got to be able to buy into your coach's scheme. You got to have star talent. You got to have role players who are willing to understand their role. And if you have a big three, you're going to have one star that's willing to sacrifice his game for the betterment of the team. And the last thing I think is important is chemistry. So what does Brooklyn have in there? They have star players. They have role players that, for the most part, understand their role very well. Bruce Brown, Jeff Green, Nick Claxton, DeAndre Jordan, Joe Harris all understand their role very well. James Harden's been willing to sacrifice, but they've only had 8 games together. And now they're implementing Blake Griffin, who needs to learn how to understand his role, which I think Steve Nash and the guys will get him to do. But again, I've never seen Blake Griffin be the 4th or 5th option in a team, so it'll be interesting to see how that transpires for him going forward, to see if he actually can do that at a high level. Be that role player they need. I think what will be interesting about this will be how many games will this big three plus Blake Griffin play together. Because it seems to be a lot similar to the Clippers situation last year. If people don't remember the Clippers situation, they only played 20 games together as a full squad, went down to the bubble where chemistry was critically important because of the fact that you were in a condensed circumstance, that psychologically it was draining, it was physically taxing, it wasn't your normal NBA kind of situation, and they went down there and did not play up to their potential. What exactly happened for people who don't know what happened to the Clippers, who are new to this podcast? Well, the Clippers blew a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets in the second round of the playoffs when they were supposed to be the favorites out of the Western Conference, and the Lakers ended up winning the World Championship. And that Clippers team was supposed to beat the Lakers, be better than the Lakers, supposed to be the LeBron stoppers, all that kind of stuff. And clearly that didn't happen because of chemistry. Because the guys didn't understand when Kawhi got doubled, how to move around the offense, how to get open looks, how to make things easier for Kawhi. Now they're much better at that this year. But Brooklyn is not, I don't think they're going to flame out in the second round of the Eastern Conference like the Clippers did. But their chemistry could pay off big time if they play against Philly. And I've made this point pretty importantly on this podcast, is that the fact of when you look at the Nets, right, you look at the way they play. They rely a lot on that small ball, and they rely a lot on ISO ball. But the guys need to have different understandings of how the pass is going to come to them, right? This is one reason why LeBron James is so good. Because LeBron James understands how role players like to get the ball passed to them. But having Blake Griffin then play, and you're having Kevin Durant play, the guys are going to have, like Joe Harris, Jeff Green, and even Blake Griffin, are going to figure out, hey, how am I going to get the ball passed to me? Where are they going to throw it from, right? How are they going to throw it? Where should I spot up? And you don't know that if you only play 8 games together as a full squad as a big three. And I'm not saying Kevin Durant can't come back and be a chemistry issue. He's not the guy I'm worried about from an offensive perspective. It's more Blake Griffin. But this is why you need Kevin Durant, because you need to see how he's going to fit with these other guys. Where are you going to put him? How is he going to get effective shots? Is he only going to take 10 shots a game? Is he going to be okay with that? Right? Because we've seen games where he's taken only about 12 shots, and he's been very effective with that. But Kyrie and Harden are shooting 18 to 20 shots, and people are saying they're scratching their head. Why is Kyrie shooting so much more than Kevin Durant? And I might be hating on the Brooklyn Nets. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm objectively looking at the fact that chemistry is super important in basketball. Even if you have star talent. Why were the Lakers effective last year? Well, the guys who were role players knew what they were doing. They had star talent. They had guys who were willing to sacrifice. And they had great chemistry. Anthony Davis and LeBron had excellent chemistry together. Excellent chemistry together. Because they played majority of the games together. They were both healthy for the most part. And that also is something that's just, people just look at it and can gloss over and say, oh, well, chemistry, if you have the talent, you could do it. Well, it's not offensively about the chemistry. It's about defensively, right? And Brooklyn has struggled with their defensive schemes. Being able to stop people consistently. They have struggled with that all season long. They've been a below average defensive team all season. They've been good recently, but they're still a below average defensive team. They're not a team I'm looking at and saying, oh yeah, that team, they're going to stop some people in the playoffs. No, I don't see them that way. I see them as an unbelievably efficient, great offensive team that can't stop anyone. Reminds me a lot of the Houston Rockets, honestly. Just with a little bit more talent. And I've said that before. They remind me a lot of the Houston Rockets because they like to go small. They like to jack up a lot of threes. They like to go a lot of ISO ball. And think about who their coaches are. Steve Nash and Mike D'Antoni as their assistant. And what was Mike D'Antoni known for in Houston? Lots of threes and ISO ball and very minimal defense. That's why chemistry is important. If you have zero chemistry on the defensive end, you're not going to know how to rotate when big moments come. You're not going to know how to adapt to different changes in offenses. And you're not going to understand different personnels and what they're going to do. Because you need practice to do that. You need game experience to do that. Because you need to struggle defensively in order to get good defensively, in my opinion. And that's why I sit there all the time when these teams are getting hyped up because they have a lot of star talent but haven't played a lot of games together, and I pause and show a little bit more caution. It's not because I don't think Brooklyn, from a talent perspective, is the best team in the NBA, and right now a top 2 team in the NBA, in my opinion. There definitely are. But they do have a lack of chemistry with these guys so far because Durant hasn't been there much, and neither has Blake Griffin. He just got there and hasn't played the first 2 games. If Blake Griffin played against the Celtics and Pistons and played well and they look good defensively, I wouldn't be saying anything at the moment because I think Kevin Durant wouldn't be the problem. But you don't have KD, who has had a lingering hamstring issue. And the problem with KD, too, is his health has been a concern. Right? You need him healthy, in my opinion, to win a championship. He's that good when healthy. He's the top 2 player in basketball. Right? I put LeBron over him, but it's not set in stone for a lot of people. Kevin Durant's definitely number 2. So the problem is if you don't have Kevin Durant there, right, you're relying on Harden and Kyrie to win a championship for you. And based on previous history, Kyrie has, as a number 1 option with Boston, they got blown out by Milwaukee in 2019. And Harden has had flameouts in the playoffs year after year. Now, this Harden could be totally different. This style that he's playing could totally lead them to a championship, probably. But you need Kevin Durant because he's a guy who's been there. He's performed really well in the playoffs as the number one option. Kyrie is a number two option. I would trust him in the playoff series because he wouldn't be required to do as much besides just score the basketball. And that's my point, is that with Brooklyn, they need chemistry. Because this sounds a lot like the Clippers of last year. A more talented version of that Clippers team, but sounds very similar to it. Everyone's looking for a team to go against LeBron James, and Brooklyn's that, right? And Brooklyn has beaten the Lakers. Now, look, Anthony Davis wasn't there, but they did beat the Lakers. And Harden and Kyrie were very effective in that game. So was Joe Harris. But again, you're implementing a new guy in Blake Griffin. You're implementing a healthy KD when he comes back, if he comes back healthy. So all this kind of stuff is very, very difficult to go through. And you think about it, too, is the fact that injuries are concerning. Blake Griffin has an injury history. Kevin Durant now has an injury history, right? Kyrie has injury history. Again, you need these guys to be healthy. You need them to play together. That's why you can't just deem a team a champion without seeing them with all the talent together. I'm still a believer that chemistry makes a champion. Because you can have all the star talent in the world, and you have no chemistry, you're not going to be able to get it done. It's why Miami in 2011 struggled at first, and that's why they didn't win a championship, because LeBron didn't know to take over games at that point, right? LeBron deserves a lot of the blame. But also that zone they ran, they didn't understand how to attack it because their chemistry wasn't on point at that year. They didn't know who should take the shot. That's why you need a lot of games together with this team, because that will help them figure out, oh, is Durant going to take the shot there? Oh, how are we going to attack, this certain coverage on man? How are we going to attack it when they trap the pick and roll? How are we going to attack it when they go zone? And defensively, how are we going to switch this? Are we going to switch? Are we going to corral? Are we going to drop? How are we going to rotate the shooters? Who are we going to double? Right? How are we going to defend guys like Embiid in the post? How are we going to defend Simmons when he drives? How are we going to wall up against Giannis? That's all the kind of stuff that when you have those guys together, you develop that chemistry quickly. Because you'll learn from playing against those teams, oh, here's where we need to be. Here's where we need to develop our game. Here's where our defensive players need to be. Here's how we are supposed to rotate. Here's when we should go zone. Here's how we should attack a zone. Here's where I want our shooters to be. Blake, this is how I want you, I want you in the high post here. I want you to be able to attack. I want you to roll into the basket. I want you popping for three here. All that kind of stuff gets developed game to game and from practice to practice. But when you don't have a healthy squad, that chemistry doesn't get developed as quickly. And then you get into big moments, and you just don't know what you're going to get. That's my point. I think Brooklyn is totally capable of winning a championship. I think they're talented enough to easily win a championship. Them and the Lakers are my favorite right now. Because you can't count out LeBron. And Brooklyn, from an offensive standpoint, is one of the best offenses I've ever seen. Maybe the best offense I've seen. The Warriors were unbelievable, but this team is unreal offensively. So again, we have to see that this hamstring issue is a problem. I think it's very concerning. I hope he comes back healthy because I love seeing Kevin Durant on the court, and I want to see that this team not flame out in the playoffs because they have no chemistry issue. I like to see them get to the finals if they could. I want to see them at least develop that chemistry. But if you don't develop chemistry, I'm not sure how good you're going to be defensively, even for how bad they are right now. And that's the important thing to take away from all of this is chemistry is crucial in basketball no matter how talented your team is. Seems like it isn't, but it is. We're going to take a short commercial break here. And on my next segment, I'm going to break down Caris Levert's return back to basketball after overcoming a precancerous mass in his kidney. And then later on my show, I'm going to be breaking down my top 5 Coach of the Year candidates. Should be a good segment. All that stuff coming back in a bit. Thank you.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder, and this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. On my last two segments, I talked about the Big 12 championship game, which Texas beat Oklahoma State 91-86, and I think both teams are primed for an Elite Eight run. And then I also broke down Kevin Durant's lingering hamstring issue, which seems very concerning, not just because of his overall health and his health concerns based on the torn Achilles he had 2 years ago and this injury, but from a chemistry perspective, it's very concerning because he's only played 8 games with Harden and Kyrie, and they just brought in Blake Griffin. Also, check on later in the show as I break down my top 5 Coach of the Year candidates, which I think will be really interesting because I think people don't realize how good of a job these coaches are doing with the teams they have. But I like talking about positive stories too, and positive sports stories I think are always motivational for a lot of athletes and people just generally. Levert is one of these great miracle stories in the NBA. Now, for people who don't know about Caris Levert, he went to Michigan, was a star at Michigan, but was riddled by injuries by his time there with foot injuries and that whole deal. And that's been kind of a story of his within the NBA, as he hasn't always been totally healthy. But during his time in Brooklyn, he's had a very successful career. And last year, he dominated and took the bubble by storm when he and Spencer Dinwiddie carried Brooklyn to a 7th seed in the Eastern Conference playoffs by keeping them afloat with a bunch of guys who just came up from the G League and role players and bench guys for Brooklyn to actually make them competitive. Think about it, they almost beat Portland and could have prevented Portland from not making the playoffs last year. And that's because he was averaging 25 a game and had some 30-point games in the bubble. And he carried it over to this year. He had some 30-point games when the whole squad wasn't there, when he actually himself was responsible for beating Philadelphia. And in his 12 games this year, he was averaging 18.5 points off the bench, and even some games in the starting lineup. And it's just an unbelievable story. And when he got traded away, because Brooklyn, as you know, has James Harden now, and in order to get James Harden, they had to give up a lot. They had to get rid of Jared Allen, Taurean Prince. They had to get rid of Caris Levert. So they sent Caris Levert to Indiana, or to Houston, and then Houston and Indiana swapped Caris Levert for Victor Oladipo. And when Caris Levert got to Indiana, there was a physical that's normally done whenever a player comes in off a trade. And they found that he had a small precancerous mass in his kidney that he probably had been playing with for a couple months. And they had to do immediate surgery on that. He didn't know if he ever would play basketball again. And Indiana went from getting a guy who was prized to make them a contender in the East to not knowing if they're going to ever have that guy come back and play basketball again for them. That was a really scary moment for them, for sure. Very scary moment. But I think what people don't get is the fact that he overcame that. He had that surgery. He was a great teammate on the sidelines, always rooting and cheering his teammates on. Just itching to get back into play. And he now, last night, had his first opportunity to come back and play in the NBA after a long time of waiting. Indiana played Phoenix last night, and Phoenix right now is the second seed in the West. Playing unbelievable basketball. It was one of the hottest teams going into the All-Star break in the NBA. Beat the Lakers. Again, they were playing at a really high level. Some people think Chris Paul's an MVP candidate because he's been carrying this team to a second seed. Well, not really carrying, but implementing his leadership style into carrying a team to a second seed. That's really been Devin Booker, who's been really that offensive firepower for them. Anyways, though, the Pacers were able to win the game last night, 122-111, and Levert had 13 points on 5 of 14 shooting in 27 minutes. Now, that's a lot of rust. He looked very rusty from three-point range. You know, he definitely showed his ability to shoot that pull-up and get to the rim. And also, I think the fact that his impact, though, was so important for this team. And it's not because miracle stories are not always great and it's just nice to have a guy on the court, but it's actually because Caris Levert can really play basketball at a high level. He's a guy that could definitely be an all-star level talent. He has that potential in him. But I think what proved things differently for him was the fact that you could see the impact he had in terms of getting other people successful too, because he can pass the ball. If you look at it, like Sabonis got a lot of easy shots in the pick and roll. Miles Turner got open threes in transition because Caris Levert likes to push the ball in transition. They make them play faster, which allows the other shooters to get open shots. And you think about it, Brogdon had 25, Sabonis had 22, and Doug McDermott had 22 against Phoenix. Now, that could be they played great games, but it also is Caris Levert is another offensive weapon for this team. And in my opinion, he's going to propel them into the playoffs because his story is so unique. I mean, a lot of guys would not be able to come over that, would be scared to play basketball again, and he was just itching to get back. He worked so hard to get himself back in position. He overcame all that crazy adversity. He said it was a blessing in disguise to have the fact that that physical would have saved his life. And I talked about earlier in my segment with the Big 12 how Andrew Jones, the leading scorer on Texas, had to overcome leukemia. It's always amazing when players are overcome something that's that serious, like a mass in your kidney or leukemia, anything surrounding cancer. It's always incredible to see a player overcome and conquer. And the big thing I think for Indiana too, why this implement of Caris Levert's offensive game is so crucial for them going forward, is because they're 18th in offensive efficiency entering last night. And they scored 122 points with him there. And that's been, I think, Indiana's biggest problem, is the fact that they don't have enough scorers that you can trust. Malcolm Brogdon and Domantas Sabonis are great players. Sabonis is an all-star, rightfully deserving so, 20 and 12, a great player. And Brogdon's a 19-point-a-game guy who I think was one of Milwaukee's biggest mistakes to let go. So you look at that, and they really needed a number 3 option, right? I think in order to contend with Brooklyn, contend with teams like Boston and Milwaukee and Philadelphia, you need a third guy you can go to for Indiana, because Indiana has a bunch of role players around those two guys. And Sabonis is mostly inside, even though he can stretch and shoot the three at a very high percentage. Sabonis is a guy you definitely space the court for. But you need another creator, right? Because Sabonis creates, Brogdon creates, but you don't really have a ton of other creators outside that. Turner's a great shot blocker, but he's a three-point shooter or a roll to the rim, run the floor type of player, right? Doug McDermott is a curl layup guy or a three-point shooter. TJ McConnell is a run-the-show point guard. Justin Holiday is a quick drive to the rim, but he's not, or like a quick three-point shooter, but he's not a guy you really want being your third scorer. He's a good role player. Like I said, their team is a role player-centric team around two good players, one star and one emerging star, in my opinion, in Malcolm Brogdon. And before that game, they struggled against the Lakers. The Lakers have the number one defense in the NBA, and they only were able to score 100 points against the Lakers. They only lost by 5, but think about it, they had Caris Levert. If they gave you 13 points, you would have won that game. And that's the impact he has, because what he does very well is he gets in the lane, and he can make plays for other players, right? Especially with all the shooters that they have in terms of Doug McDermott and Malcolm Brogdon and Miles Turner and Justin Holiday and even TJ McConnell just cutting to the basket, right? You have another playmaker who can make shots for himself and for others. And in today's NBA, that's crucial because you need guys who can be able to create their own shot. And Caris LeVert is actually one of, I think, the better young guys at doing that. He's only 26. He hasn't even really hit his prime yet. And he has gotten better, I think, each year he's been in the NBA. And he's a guy that's very quick off the dribble, especially going to his right hand. He's athletic. He can shoot the three. He can get to the rim. He's 77% from the line, so he's a reliable guy you can trust down the stretch when he gets fouled. And I think from his perspective, it's good for him to be able to play basketball again. Like he said in a post-game interview, he's very thankful to God and he just, thankful to everyone who supported him. And, credit to him. He's a humble guy based on what he said in an interview. And he could have said, I didn't want to do this anymore and complained and not fought through it. But this just shows you how sports are motivational and also a great reference for life. And why is that? Because sports show exactly how to overcome challenges, how to deal with people, how to be part of a team. And he wanted to be a part of this team. He wanted to showcase his skills. He wants to help this team get back in the playoff race. Right now, they're 9th in the East. 9th in the East. So, right now, they have a great opportunity to continue to win games. Continue to get themselves in the playoff picture. I think they're going to make the playoffs. Depending on what seed they get, I don't know. But I think they're totally going to make the playoffs. Because I think he brings an offensive dimension to them that they didn't have. They struggle to score points. Now they have a third score. Right? And if he comes back to his full self, think about it. 19 points a game, basically, to mix with 20 from Sabonis and 19 from Brogdon. You can put the ball in Brogdon or his hands, and that's a difficult duo to stop because they can score from all three levels. I would say LeVert definitely lives in the mid-range a little bit more. Brogdon's more of a three-point shooter and a go-to-the-rim kind of player, even though he can create his own shot very well. And then you have Sabonis, who can create his own shot no problem. Sabonis is a very smart player and the best player on the team. So you have three young guys who are star-level talents who can all score. And Indiana's, 18th in the NBA, which is in the bottom half of the NBA in offensive efficiency. And I think that's going to go up with him there. If they can get top 12 in offensive efficiency with him there, they're going to make the playoffs because they lost a lot of games because they couldn't score well enough. That was their problem. And when I look at this team, I think about a couple things. I think of a team that has gone through a lot of adversity with him. Also, a new head coaching change, not being quite able to overcome the adversities of injuries. Right, LeVert's out. They still have T.J. Warren out, who's also, as people don't remember, he was killing it in the bubble. He was averaging 30 points a game for a period of time. People didn't even know who this guy was, and he was averaging 30 points in the bubble. So if he can come back and give you 12 to 15 points, this team can be very dangerous. They haven't really been fully healthy this year, and they've had to rely on guys like T.J. McConnell and Doug McDermott and Justin Holiday and role players who are not big-time scorers. But the one thing I'll say about T.J. McConnell, though, and this is why it's good that LeVert's there, is he gets to be that feisty backup point guard off the bench. And why that's good for this team is because he's going to be able to provide his defensive presence, provide a, push the pace guy off the bench, because I think they're going to play fast with Levert anyway. And I think that's what they need to do, because Levert, I think, is very good in transition. But then you also have a guy, and McConnell comes off, and he's a less dirty version, but he's a Matthew Dellavedova type. He's a guy that's undersized, plays hard-nosed defense, gets guys involved, knows his role. And Nate Bjorken has a very easy job now, because all he has to do is just run a lot of pick and rolls, a lot of transition, push the pace offense for this team, because they have smart players and they have shooters. But now you have three, like I said, you have three 19-point-a-game to 20-point-a-game scorers who can get the job done in different ways, which again is super important. Look at last night, right? Phoenix is a top 5 defensive team in the NBA. They scored 122 points on Phoenix last night at Phoenix. And Phoenix has been one of the hottest teams in the NBA. Put that in perspective. I think Caris Levert was one of the biggest mistakes Brooklyn could have done, giving away Caris Levert and Jarrett Allen. Now, look, it has proven well for Brooklyn because James Harden has really helped them out. I think Jarrett Allen was the biggest loss because they have no rim protector now. But Caris Levert was a huge piece off the bench that could have helped them out now if they had him. And now Indiana gets a benefit from him. He gets to start for them. He gets to dominate. He gets to get the ball a lot. He gets to run a lot of point guard duties if he has to. Him and Brogdon can share those duties. And he's going to be able to do what he does best, which is drive right to get to the rim, hit his mid-range pull-ups, and continually put pressure on defenses. It's not going to just be Brogdon and Sabonis, right? Because Brogdon also has very inconsistent nights. But and the thing is, it's going to make Miles Turner's job a lot easier because all he has to do is spot from 3 or roll to the basket. And now he's got 2 guards who know how to get to the rim and get their man to bite on certain moves so they can get by them and then suck the defense in and make plays for others. And the thing is, I watched Levert last night. When they ran a lot of those side line pick and rolls or wing pick and rolls, he would refuse it a lot. And everyone does this thing called drop coverage in the NBA, or switch it, right? But a lot of these teams who have bigger guys do drop coverage, which where the big just sits back. And what's great is that he sucked the big in with him. He just throws a little pocket pass to Sabonis, and Sabonis is very good at finishing around the basket, and it works really well for them. But then also, if the big sags back to Sabonis, he can shoot that mid-range pull-up, and that's one of, I think, Levert's best attributes, because he's only a 35% three-point shooter, a little under that. He's not an exceptional three-point shooter. I think it's also because he takes a lot of bad threes and contested threes, but he is very good in the mid-range area. So again, you get him in that situation where he and Sabonis are playing two-man game. This could be a very dangerous team. And look, I'm a Knicks fan and I want the Knicks to make the playoffs, but the Pacers with Levert, I think, are going to make the playoffs. They are a dangerous team, and they can be dangerous because I think they have shot blockers, they can defend, but I think also the fact now they have ability now to play fast and not just slow down the pace all the time, to just play dribble handoff series with Sabonis will be good for them because Turner wants to run, Sabonis can run the floor, and then you have all your shooters, right? I think that's what makes the NBA interesting is that you have a lot of these transition teams who like to jack up a lot of threes, and I think that works a lot of times. So now they can balance styles, right? Because Levert can totally play in the half court, but he's young and full of energy, so he can also run, get guys open, get his own shot, put pressure on defenses, especially opposing big guys that play in the East. So they play Giannis or Brook Lopez or even just, the MVP of everyone's mind in Joel Embiid. They're going to put pressure on those defenses because of the fact that they're going to have to make those big guys get back instead of walking the ball up all the time and having to run their offense and running their dribble handoff series and then posting up Sabonis and then seeing what Sabonis does and then kicking it back out. It's actually going to work out, I think, a little bit better for them going forward because they're going to be able to play exactly the way they want to and also have a third guy who they were waiting on before that kidney injury to be maybe the second option on this team. Because I think Brogdon is very good. But I do think Levert's a better player. I do. I think Levert is a little bit more creative with his offensive moves. I think Levert has ability to score more effectively from all three levels, even though Brogdon's a better three-point shooter. I personally like Levert's ability to create a little bit better and push the pace. But Brogdon arguably could have been an all-star, right? Arguably. He was a 19-point-a-game guy. He played great this year. He has been playing great. And I think when you add Levert in there, you have less of a pressure on him to deliver. And I think that is super important, right? Because if you put in his position to be successful, you're in prime position to be able to win games in the East. Especially because the East is so tight between 5 and 11. It really comes down to the talent you have on your team and how you're going to be able to, affect games down the stretch. And Indiana's lost a lot of games down the stretch this year because I think they just haven't had another guy they could go to and trust. Because Sabonis is the guy they trust down the stretch. But the problem is with Sabonis is a big, right? Even though he could shoot threes, he's more of a catch and shoot 3-point shooter. And as a result of that, he's not going to be able to always hit that 3-point shot you need off the dribble. And that's where you put a guy like Levert in that situation. Because what Levert can do is Levert's a guy who can take and make the big shot. Now, he missed one against Portland last year, but again, he can make big shots if you need him to, and he's a guy that can create his own shot. He has no problem doing that. And then you have Brogdon who can do it. So, again, you have three guys you can throw the ball to at the end of games now and have them get a shot. And now they get to develop chemistry early. Like I talked about with Brooklyn, having issues with the chemistry. Now you have Levert back. You have a chance to win games, bring the chemistry angle there, and then also just develop every offensive scheme you want with this, and also defensive scheme. Right? To win games, like I said, you need chemistry, but you also need guys who are going to be able to produce. So this is great for Indiana. And I think the East needs to look out and be fearful of Indiana because they now have three guys who can get a bucket anytime they want. Not to the level of like Brooklyn, obviously, but they can. This team's a very young and exciting team to look at going forward. We're going to take a short commercial break here, but when I get back, I'm going to break down my top 5 Coach of the Year candidates in the NBA, and I think you guys will be very interested to see what I have to say about that. Thank you, and we'll see you back here very shortly.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder, and on my last segment, I talked about the obvious fact of Caris Levert being a good, successful story coming back to the NBA, and also the fact that I think he makes Indiana a very dangerous team in the Eastern Conference playoffs going forward. So it'll be really exciting to see how all that stuff transpires. But on this segment, I'm going to talk about a little bit of my top 5 Coach of the Year candidates. That's right, Coach of the Year candidates. And I'm really excited to talk about it. And it'll be really exciting to break all this stuff down and talk about who I think the best coaches are. I'm going to start at number 5 and then go up to number 1 for you guys. So you guys are going to be intrigued who I think number 1 is. Number 5, I have Steve Kerr. And it's pretty simple. This Warriors team is not that good. Kelly Oubre has not been what they expected. Andrew Wiggins has been very inconsistent. Draymond Green has not been at all the offensive player he once was. And James Wiseman has been in and out of the lineup. It really has been a Steph Curry show. They're the 9th seed in the West right now. They have a top 6 defense in the NBA. I'm going to repeat that again. They're 9th in the West, with basically Steph Curry and a bunch of like 14-point-a-game guys. In the Western Conference on money. This is the Eastern Conference. They would right now be the 5th seed in the East. So take that in perspective. They're in the Western Conference, and they have not nearly the talented enough team to get them to the championship necessarily, or even get them a top 5 spot. I mean, they're 9th in the West right now. They're competitive. And that's because of the fact of what Steve Kerr has implemented. Yes, it's been Steph Curry, but he's also putting Steph Curry in position to be successful. He's running them up a lot of pick and rolls, running a lot of that Warriors offense, pin down stuff that they ran before, where Steph uses about 3 or 4 screens to get open. Draymond still is fantastic at passing the basketball and reading defenses. And Steph is averaging 29.2 points a game on 47% shooting and 41% from 3. A little under that, 40.6% to be exact. And this is with facing double teams, traps, face guards, when the whole defense is guarding him. That shows you Steve Kerr is getting him in position to be successful, and it's also he and Steph have worked with each other for so long that they're able to get that figured out. But I think also you have to look at the fact that, again, they're top 6 defensively in the NBA in defense. That has been something they were like emphasizing they were struggling with at the beginning of the year when they were getting blown out of games. And the fact that they're competitive is because of their defense. Their offense is not that good this year because Oubre hasn't been exactly consistent, and neither is Wiggins. And Eric Pascal is a 10-point-a-game scorer. Draymond Green is not scoring a lot of points. And Wiseman has been in and out of the lineup, and when he does play, you don't necessarily know offensively what you're going to get from him every night. But I think the fact is, what he has implemented is that like a guy like Tosano Anderson has become a great defender for this team, and that is because he's developed them from that rebuilding process last year. And look, I don't think the Warriors are going to make the playoffs, to be honest with you, but I think the fact that they're competitive in games and playing great defense and that they can actually make things interesting in the West, and the fact that they're actually going to probably be in the play-in is really interesting. And that shows me that it's coaching, right? Yes, it's leadership with Draymond and Steph, right? You could say that for sure. And a good culture. But Kerr has established a defensive principle. Now, remember, he also had one of the best defensive teams in the NBA when they won NBA championships. So he knows how to do that. And also, offensively, they're running the same kind of offense. They just don't have the talent like they have other years. They don't have Klay Thompson. They don't have Kevin Durant anymore, right? They don't have those guys. And especially if they had Klay Thompson, they would be much better than they are right now if Klay Thompson was fully healthy. Because that would have been another shooter, and Steph Curry would not have had to be asked to jack up 25 shots a night. And the fact that he's asked to do that and they're still 9th in the West shows you a little bit of what he is as a coach, which is he understands how to get the best out of these guys and win games and win championship level of games. I mean, that's because he's been there, right? He's been there, and what I mean by he knows how to win championship level of games is he has won 3 NBA championships. So even though this team is probably not necessarily a playoff team, they're in the playoff hunt because of the fact they play defense, they move the ball offensively, and Steph is fantastic. And that's coaching. That's not just great players, right? Because you're not going to be great defensively. Look at Brooklyn, for example, right? Brooklyn's got all the offensive talent in the world. They're terrible defensively. And that's why guys like Wiseman and Tosano Anderson and Kent Bazemore and guys like that get minutes because they provide some defensive impact. Now, Wiseman's still learning, right? So people are going to probably push back a little bit on that. But Tosano Anderson's been fantastic defensively this year. And that's because the coach knows what he's getting from him. And the coach has also implemented a scheme that fits that guy, like a Tosano Anderson, to be successful. That's why. That's what it ultimately comes down to. Right? If you think about all this kind of stuff, that's what it ultimately comes down to. Is what exactly are the Warriors going to be? And the Warriors right now are going to be a good defensive team that's going to move the ball, that's going to be competitive, but not super talented. The fact that they're competitive is coaching. That's what it is. And that's why Steve Kerr's 5. Number 4 on my list is Greg Popovich. And that's really simple. With DeMar DeRozan as your best player and the rest of the guys kind of being mediocre star role player guys, they are 7th in the West. My apologies there. At one point, they were 4th in the West. But I think what's incredible about them is that They only have one guy averaging near 20 points, and that's DeMar DeRozan, who should have been an all-star this year and wasn't. But the thing is, what they're doing is they're playing consistent Spurs basketball again, right? They have not much talent, but they're moving the ball effectively, right? They're getting DeMar DeRozan in great spots. They have a good defensive scheme because of Greg Popovich understanding how these things work. And they're Spurs basketball. They're moving the ball a lot. They're getting open shots. They're driving gaps. And they're listening to what he has to say. And the fact is, the guys understand their roles, right? In order to win basketball games, you have to understand your roles. And I think, comparably to the Warriors, since they're in playoff position, that's why Popovich has been better this year. Because I think from a talent perspective, both these teams are not that talented. But the fact that the Spurs are really good at 19 and 15 has shown. Now, look, they are a massive pretender because I don't think they're actually going to go far in the playoffs because I don't think they have enough talent. But the fact that they're in the playoff picture shows me exactly what I need to know about Greg Popovich, is why he's one of the greatest coaches of all time. It's because he gets guys to buy into their role. He has a star player in DeMar DeRozan and a bunch of guys who understand around him how to play basketball at a high level and how to understand their roles properly. And that's how they're going to win games in the future with if they can get some more talent in the draft or in free agency. Because what they understand is how to buy into Popovich, how to buy into understanding role play. When I mean role play, I mean the role players understand that their roles are key. And people don't understand this with basketball. The impact of role players are so crucial to why teams are successful, right? Let's think about, for example, the 2015 Cavs team that lost in 6 games to the finals, right? LeBron had an unreal final series averaging 35, 11, and 10, right? Unbelievable, right? Without Matthew Dellavedova there, right, that would have been tough for him to win some games because even though LeBron carried them, Matthew Dellavedova's defense on a guy like Steph Curry was a big reason why they also were able to be competitive in those games. Ray Allen, key role player, making that big shot in Game 6 in the 2013 finals, right, to get them to that Game 7, right? Role players are so key, and that's what the Spurs have always been built on. Star players, but role players that get their roles, that want to buy into team winning and buy into team success. That's the Spurs way. That's why the Spurs are good, and that's why the Spurs right now are 7th in the West, and that's why Popovich is 4th on the coaches of the year candidate rankings that I have produced. Now, let's talk about the fact that he's not above a guy like Eric Spoelstra. And the reason why is Eric Spoelstra went through a lot more adversity than Greg Popovich has, and his team is doing better in the East than the Spurs are in the West. Now, the Spurs are in a tougher conference, which I understand, but let's talk about the fact that Spoelstra's team in the Miami Heat made the finals last season. They've had Jimmy Butler only playing 23 of the games this year, Goran Dragic only playing 23 games, Tyler Hero only playing 26, and that was due to injuries and COVID protocol. That made a disastrous start. They were at one point 12th in the East, and now they are right now in prime position to be 4th at this moment in the East right now. And they're back in that kind of hunt as a contender. And the reason why is because they are a top 5 defensive team in the NBA. They're right now 5th in defensive rating. They have seen major improvement from Bam Adebayo, where he's making mid-range jump shots consistently. He's still doing everything else that he's really good at. And the fact is, they all buy into the Pat Riley Spoelstra way. Whatever I think Spoelstra has implemented is something that Pat Riley taught him, is to be on time, to carry about your body, to buy into team culture, to play defense, to have guys that want to win and that understand their role. And I think Miami is the best team in the NBA at guys who understand their role. Duncan Robinson understands that he is a three-point shooter. That's all he does, right? Bam Adebayo understands that he has to, defend all 5 positions, rebound, and be effective on the offensive end in terms of being a playmaker. Jimmy Butler understands that he has to be that superstar, and Tyler Hero understands that he's got to be that scoring punch off the bench. And a guy like Goran Dragic understands that he's got to be that veteran leadership. When they need stuff from him, he's able to produce it. And guys like Precious Achiuwa understand they have to be energy guys off the bench to go in and provide good defensive minutes, to be able to get this team to buy into a certain culture and certain habits, right? And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense because Spoelstra has developed that for years. This team was not that talented last year, and they made the NBA Finals because everyone knew their roles. Younger guys stepped up, and their offense was predicated on a lot of ball movement, dribble handoffs, and the fact that there is a potential scare of Bam Adebayo either from the mid-range or the rim, or a three-point shooter coming off, and in terms of it being Hero or Duncan Robinson, who can just let it fly. And then you also got guys like Kendrick Nunn, who are guys who can get their own shot no problem and can score, and they provide an offensive boost too. And that's what he's asking these guys to do. But everyone on this team is asked to play defense at the best level they can, right? But guys like Duncan Robinson have a thinner leash because Duncan Robinson is a phenomenal three-point shooter. And that's what the thing is with Miami, right? Miami is dangerous because their role players are, I think, the best in the NBA at understanding what they are asked to do and what they need to do for a team to be successful. They're not about all that the individual stats stuff. That's why Jimmy Butler has been great with this team because he's doing whatever he needs to do to win games. And that's why Bam Adebayo has been so good this year because he understands what he needs to do to be the most effective version of himself and the most effective winner for this team. And that's what makes Spoelstra so good. Because if you think about it, if you think about what Spoelstra has done, they have a lot of ball movement, right? And the fact that they have a lot of shooters, a great defense, a team that gets along with each other on and off the court, a team that plays for them, for not just themselves, but for the team most importantly. That's why they are so effective. That's why they're good. And that's why they're fourth in the East after everyone thought they were going to be out of the playoffs and the biggest disappointment this year. That is coaching. Not necessarily leadership, because leadership is very important too. That is coaching and the implement of a culture from Pat Riley to Eric Spoelstra to now it gets into the Miami team. That's why Spoelstra is top 3. That is why. Because he's been able to still build on that success, and also the fact that the role players on Miami do a better job than the Spurs, in my opinion, of understanding their roles, but also the fact that I think they're better defensively, they have more trust star talent, and the fact that he has gotten this team from rock bottom to 4th place in the East is why he's ahead of Popovich. Now, number 2 on my list, and this will be interesting because everyone thinks this guy's going to win Coach of the Year. And I get it if everything holds up and let's say that like the Knicks or someone drops lower, right? Or, Miami drops lower or whatever like that, right? Or the Spurs, don't do it. But Quinn Snyder right now is my number 2 Coach of the Year candidate. And look, he has a lot of things going for him that why he could win Coach of the Year, right? They have a top 5 defense and a top 5 offense. They have Rudy Gobert, who's playing great this year. They have 6 guys in their lineup that average 10 points or more. They are one of the top teams in rebounding. From what I saw yesterday, they're still top 3 in rebounding. And they are a 40% three-point shooting team this year, which was 2 percentage points higher than they were last year. And then you also look at the fact that they're top 5 in point differential. They have the best record in the NBA, and they're in the Western Conference. Donovan Mitchell has taken a huge step this year where he was an all-star and he's averaging about 24 points a game this year, playing, I think, the best level of his career. And they progressed, right? They have great ball movement. Jordan Clarkson's probably going to be the 6th man year candidate. This is the best season of his career in terms of he has the best assists of his career, the most points of his career, the best free throw percentage of his career. Like I say, he's 96.7% from the free throw line. And look, they have a really good team of guys who understand their role, right? I think them and Miami are the 2 best teams in the NBA at this, but Miami's definitely, I think, a little bit better because Miami's been doing it longer. But Utah's guys generally understand that Donovan Mitchell's the best player. Jordan Clarkson's the next guy, but Mike Conley was an all-star, right? He's playing at a much better level because they all are buying into Quinn Snyder. They're buying into his offense with a lot of ball movement, get to the guards, let them go off pick and rolls, either shoot threes or kick it out, look for Rudy Gobert, dive into the basket. And that's why they're so good, because they have a high three-point rate because of all the pick and rolls they run and how effective they are at it. Because if you leave Rudy Gobert open, he's going to dunk it. If you help on Rudy Gobert, you have Joe Ingles, Royce O'Neal, Bogdanovich, Clarkson, Conley, all these guys open for three-point shots. Georges Niang, I forgot about him as well. And that's what makes them so effective, is because since they have such a great record and such a great offense and defense, Quinn Snyder is going to win Coach of the Year probably by most people's estimations because of what he's been able to turn this team from a shrinking under pressure team that blew a 3-1 lead to underachieving last year to a team this year who's number one in the Western Conference. And the road to the playoffs at this moment looks like it's going to have to go through Utah. And that's a credit to coaching and him having the guys buy into winning. And that's why he's number 2. And he's done an incredible job this year and really should get credit for all the great stuff he's done this season. And the fact that they're better than the Lakers and the Clippers and the Suns in record is not something a lot of people saw coming. And the fact that they're living up to being a championship contender is something that people saw, and that's all a credit to his coaching and his ability to get the most out of guys, right? Jordan Clarkson's had the best season of his career, and that's all because he's allowed Jordan Clarkson to become the best version of himself. Allowed Jordan Clarkson to play off ball screen. Allowed Jordan Clarkson to play ISO. And because Jordan Clarkson's got a lot of skills in his game, and also the fact that he's buying into a lot more three-point shooting has allowed his team to also be very successful because the NBA is so dominant in the three-point arc. That's what has allowed him also to become a really fine, good coach. Now, my number 1 coach for Coach of the Year at this moment is Tom Thibodeau. And that might be a hot take for some people to think about, but I surely do not think it is. And the reason why I don't think it is because the Knicks have been a laughingstock in the NBA for about almost 15 years, right? They had a really good year in 2013. 2012, 2011, they weren't that great, right? But the one thing that's been really impressive about them is they are 6th in the East. They're 20-19. They have, last year, they only had 21 wins total. And the fact that they're a top 4 defensive team, they're number 1 in points allowed defensively. They're number 1 in field goal percentage, right? That means they allow the lowest field goal percentage in the NBA. That they're also on the top 5 rebounding team. Julius Randle's been an all-star. The fact that Elfrid Payton has went up 2.6 in his points per game average. RJ Barrett's taking a next step. And the fact that they are a matured team, right? They have a good culture. They live off defense, moving the ball, getting the Julius Randle, playing tough, rebounding, right? And the fact is, this is what Tibbs does. Tibbs goes to teams and they normally become pretty successful. Chicago, they were a playoff team basically every year he was there. And even Minnesota, with all the chaos they had, they were a playoff team in 2018. And they did that by beating Denver and they took the Rockets to 5 games. And also, look, the fact is, the reason why he's Coach of the Year, in my opinion, is it comes down to one simple thing. Is that the Knicks are now a playoff contender, and they were 21-45 last year, and were horrible in terms of defense. They were bottom end of the team. They were 23rd in defensive efficiency. They were 18th in points allowed. This year, they're 1st in points allowed and 4th in defensive efficiency. So it's just been a massive culture change. Massive culture change. And the fact that Julius Randle went from being a guy that people wanted out of New York to being a guy now that people are saying, oh, look, we can trust this guy in big moments, is a credit to what Tom Thibodeau has implemented in New York. And I'm a Knicks fan, right? So that may be a little bit of a biased thing there, but it's not biased. I'm objectively looking at it and saying the Knicks have been one of the worst, have been, the record-wise, the worst team in the NBA the last 10, 12 years. And you bring a guy in, and right now they're a playoff team because of the fact that he's implemented the right culture. He's gotten this team to play defense. Julius Randle has been allowed to become the best version of himself. And as a result of that, the Knicks right now are a playoff team. They're 6th in the East. Sorry, 7th in the East. My bad. Charlotte overtook them last night. I misspoke there earlier. But still, they're fighting for that 5 to 7 spot. And the fact that they're in playoff contention is all a credit to Thibodeau because he's gotten these guys to play to their potential. Right? Mitchell Robinson, before he got injured, was not getting in foul trouble. Taj Gibson brings great minutes because he's been with Thibodeau before and he knows what he expects. And the guys love him because he's tough. He holds you accountable. And this team is a team that definitely can make the playoffs and definitely can at least challenge for a playoff series win because of how great they play defensively and how much they... That's the end of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I was your host, Michael Schroeder. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please follow us on Twitter and Facebook and subscribe to us on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, check out GSMC Basketball Podcasts on the GSMC Podcast Network website. So thank you so much for tuning in.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.